Maybe even Golden State, if a Kevin Durant decides to leave or Klay Thompson decides to leave, maybe they'd go with Boogie Cousins and sign him to a big deal. So I think it's probably the first time in DeMarcus Cousins' NBA career that he's made a move that is extremely mature. And every other NBA player that's out there complaining on Twitter, all these other teams had a chance to go sign this guy, and they didn't do it by not offering him any money. I mean, even the Pelicans gave Julius Randle 2 years and $18 million. Cousins signed 1 year and 5.3. They wouldn't even offer him like a 1 year, $9 million deal. There was nothing else that came through. So this is on the league, Eric, for other teams not blocking this and just offering more money. And it's a problem with the league. The bad teams that have cap space want to suck to get a good pick next year. They don't want to burn their cap space. And the good teams are already cooked on the cap and they don't want to go into the luxury tax anymore.
Yeah, it's a move that, my first reaction, because of my visceral reaction to Golden State, because of what I've been through with the last 4 years.
I'm sure it wasn't kid-friendly.
With Golden State. No, I mean, I was upset at first. I'm going to admit that I was. And then I did hear the point that you brought up, that nobody else called him. Nobody else offered him anything. And then you also kind of think it through. If you wipe the city and the Warriors logos off the jerseys and you just think about the pieces that they have and what it affords Boogie Cousins the ability to do, yeah, he was very productive in New Orleans, 25 and 12 type of guy, very good player, but an Achilles injury was tough on a guy like Kobe Bryant, who was as fit as they come. Boogie Cousins is easily 70 to 80 pounds heavier than that. And that's a tough injury to have. But he goes to a Golden State where he's not going to have that much pressure to play 30 or even 35 minutes a game because, well, for one, they've got Zaza Pachulia or Draymond Green in certain rotations. Boogie can work his way into that lineup in a very minimal role at first. There's no pressure because no one's going to say, oh, this guy's making $20 million a year. He needs to come in here and be amazing. No, he's making the mid-level exception. He can play a role on that team, and as you said, get the training and support physically that he needs. It's a very mature decision. And so if I take the Warriors off the jerseys and just look at the team, look at Boogie Cousins, and look at the choice that he had to make based on no other offers coming in, I really can't blame the guy.
No, you're exactly right with Cousins. I mean, it's an opportunity for him, again, to revive his career, rehab his image that the league has of him. And look, this is a year where, as we talked about on podcast last year, where the money is scarce. I mean, we were talking pre-show about some of the free agents that are out there. You've got Clint Capella, who's a restricted free agent that's talking to Houston. You've got guys like Marcus Smart that are still out there. Isaiah Thomas is still out there unsigned.
He won't be with LeBron.
Well, no, he's definitely not going to be back with L.A. He's unrestricted anyways. Jabari Parker's a restricted free agent. Zach LaVine's restricted. Kyle Anderson, who played a big role with the Spurs, is still out there. Nurkic is still out there. There's a lot of names that are out there, Eric, and it just doesn't seem like a lot of money. My mind was blown when I saw Dante Exum signed a 3-year, $33 million deal to stay in Utah because he didn't really do much for them. And then you see other guys that seem like they can't get paid or the money is just not there for some of these guys. It's been a very perplexing free agency where Aaron Gordon gets $84 million and Julius Randle gets $18. It's kind of blown my mind. And then you look at the list of free agents that are out there that could absolutely make a difference on some of these teams. I could definitely see maybe the Lakers making a move for some of these guys because, again, I think, to your point, they're looking ahead at 2019. There's something in the works out there that is behind the scenes. I just can't believe they don't have something of a plan or an outline in place of, if we miss these guys, we're going to do this in 2019, but we'll try to put the best roster we can around you, LeBron, in 2018 with all these one-year deals because guess what? They all come off the cap, and they'll have all that cap space next year. But is there anybody that you see in that free agent list that you would like to see go to L.A. or anybody that jumps off the page to you?
I'd have to say Clint Capella would be my number one guy. I mean, just because of the force that he is and proved to be in Houston, he played exceptionally well in those playoffs. I think a lot of people will overlook that because a lot of the attention, of course, was on James Harden with his MVP run coming, as we know now, and then with Chris Paul and then his eventual injury. But Clint Capella played phenomenal basketball in the paint for Houston in their playoff run. A guy like that on the Lakers would be great. So I look to him first, but even a guy like Nurkic, I mean, if you just have something that's more serviceable than Brook Lopez and then JaVale McGee, because I just don't think JaVale McGee is going to be like their be-all, end-all at the center position.
He's going to be a rotation
guy.
So,
you can't be satisfied with that. In fact, I even put on Twitter after the DeMarcus Cousins thing. Now, I will admit it was when I was first mad about it, but I said, LA Lakers, Lance Stevenson, JaVale McGee, Rajon Rondo, LeBron James, and then I put Golden State Warriors, hold my beer, and then, they signed Cousins. So now they have 5 All-Stars on that team. It's just something, they've got to do something. And I think for me, Capella, it might not be a household name, but he moves the needle for me in terms of value on the court. I think Rondo starts over Lonzo. I think ultimately Lakers still try to unload Lonzo. Now, he conveniently has a meniscus injury and makes him harder to move now, but there's just not enough there. They almost need Capella, Smart. They need maybe 1 or 2 of those pieces to come in and then partner up with a Rondo and a McGee and have some sort of rotation. But I hope LeBron is enjoying playing 40 minutes a game, because I'm not sure that changes.
I think Capella ends up finding his way back to Houston. That just seems like the perfect fit.
Well, they can't let him go. They're stupid if they do.
He did so much for them. He was one of the main reasons that they were in that Warrior series and up, because he controlled the rim, was a defensive force, killed them on the boards. I think that's one of the reasons they went out. And when Cousins called them, they were probably like, heck yeah, because both Houston and Cleveland dominated them in Golden State on the boards. It wasn't even close. You get DeMarcus Cousins in there, and that's back to your point with Cousins, why it's a perfect fit. They don't need him right away. He can sit out for them, and they will still win a ton of basketball games, and they don't have to rush him back. If he's January or February coming back, they can work him in and have him ready for these playoff series where offensive rebounding and possessions are at a premium, where Cousins is a guy that can get you 15, 18, 20 rebounds like nothing. So there's so many names out there. I think that'll probably be next week on the show, what we'll be talking about. These secondary and tertiary type of players that are out there, these Marcus Smarts, will Boston bring him back? Do they do something with him? He played a key role for them down the stretch. That's a team that's got a lot of talent on it. Kyrie coming back. Terry Rozier stepped up. What is Marcus Smart's role on that team? We know Brad Stevens loved him. He's that hustle guy. He's the guy that gives them their edge. But cap space is at a premium for them. They don't have a lot. How much do they want to go into the luxury tax? There's a lot of moves left to be made out there, but in the end, do they even really matter at this point?
Well, there's one last thing that we don't have time to talk about on this show, and really it doesn't need to be talked about on this show because we're going to have to get into it in the middle of the NBA season. The one thing we have to remember is that we don't have to solidify the Sixers roster, the Lakers roster. We don't have to solidify any of these rosters right now in terms of championship contention, because I almost feel like this is a 2-part miniseries for the Lakers. This is, here's what's going to happen in free agency. We'll start the season. We'll see where the dust settles. I don't like it, but unfortunately, I think Melo does find his way to LA. I just think him and LeBron have talked about it for so many years that it's just bound to happen because he's going to get kicked to the curb in Oklahoma City. And so he's got to go somewhere where he feels like he can finish out his career and be somewhat valuable, although he's just not valuable, but he'll end up there. And then we get to right before the trade deadline mid-season, and the Lakers could remake 40 to 50% of that roster during the middle of the season, just like the Cavaliers did. So I honestly think this is a 2-part miniseries for the Lakers.
Well, as you said, there's still a lot of pieces out there, a lot of things that are going to happen this summer, and even more that's going to happen as we go into the season and we get to buyout season when teams start letting guys go. We saw some of the names the Sixers added last year that aided in their playoff run. Both of those guys have left, but you can tell that these buyouts that happen, they can add depth and talent to teams that are trying to make playoff runs. Great for us because it always gives us content and something to talk about. But that's a wrap for the NBA here in segment 1. When we come back in segment 2, Eric talked about it in the teaser. We have our first interview on the show. Jim Noble, host of Trade and Paint on Sirius XM Channel 90 every day from 11 to 3. He joins us for an interview on the show. We're going to talk about the state of NASCAR and what he saw on Sunday in one of the most exciting races we've seen of the year, and a finish that we're going to see replayed over and over for many, many years. We'll have that when we come back.
We're back on segment 2 of Talk Back. As you listeners know, this is often the talk-worthy section of our podcast, but we have a special guest this week. We have one of the hosts of NASCAR Sirius XM Radio's Trade and Paint that airs from 11 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We wanted to welcome Jim Noble to the show to talk NASCAR this week. Jim, welcome.
Guys, thanks for having me.
Well, Jim, obviously we wanted to have you on the show. Eric had connected with you on Twitter, topics you guys have been talking about there on Trade and Paint each day and things that have come up just about the sport, sort of the state of the sport. But obviously on Sunday, we got one heck of a race, I think, as fans, what we've been wanting to see, a race that had multiple leaders, strategy playing in, a great race for the win in stage 2, and then ultimately what we got there at the end. Of everything that you guys have talked about on your show, we've obviously talked about here on our podcast, is the quickest way to get fans back to the sport and get it sort of off this decline is just having more races like we had on Sunday?
Yeah, absolutely. We needed this badly. We so needed this badly. And I don't know whether it's just the dog days of summer or coming off some races that we thought were going to be good that weren't that great. Road course in Sonoma, places like that. We really needed a finish like that we got in Chicagoland. And I tell you what, for Kyle Larson and Kyle Busch to do what they did, and plus for them both to understand what racing for the win was all about. That was the cool part for me, guys, is the fact that they were able to bump and bang, hit each other, and then give each other the thumbs up and shake hands in victory lane. Look, there's a lot of guys who would have been cranky about it and said, how dare you touch me? We needed something like that. And that was just, it was such a breath of fresh air because, let's face it, I don't think we've had a lot of drama this year in the Cup Series. I don't think we've had a whole lot of conflict. Not that we got the conflict, but we got the things that lead to conflict. So I'm cautiously optimistic this is going to lead to bigger and better things as the summer progresses.
Yeah, I agree totally. And I thought one thing Eric and I always think about what Dale Earnhardt used to say. It doesn't matter if fans are cheering or booing. It's just that they're making noise and they have an opinion, whether they like what Kyle Busch did or they disagree with it. It's the fact that people are talking about the sport. And even Jeff Gluck's post-race poll, where he had the most people that have ever voted and had the second highest positive rating for a race at 92%. I think it speaks a lot about what the fans, to your point, have been waiting for.
I think so. And and this isn't an indictment on the racing the rest of the year. I actually think the racing's been pretty decent. The problem is you've had the same guys winning the whole time. And I think that jades everybody's opinion on how good the race was. I think the racing's been pretty good. It hasn't been, the best season so far, but I think it's been, pretty interesting. The one thing we haven't had is we haven't had kind of the big three. Your Kyle Busch, Kevin Harvick, Martin Truex Jr. We haven't had them really go toe-to-toe for a win, kind of the way that Larson and Busch did in Chicagoland on Sunday. We ever get that Harvick versus Kyle or Harvick versus Truex or Truex versus Kyle thing,
right.
Where there are some feelings that are bruised after that. That's what we need. If the Celtics and Lakers were a great rivalry back in the 80s because they went up against each other for the titles, but they also had a healthy dislike of each other. Yankees and Red Sox. We could go back and forth about these rivalries. We need the best people in the sport to go head to head against each other. And so far, whenever those guys have won, it's pretty much been a walk away. So maybe we add Larson into the conversation too. That should be a very optimistic thing Sunday for Chevy fans in general and Larson fans in particular.
Jim, you hit the nail right on the head. In fact, as your co-host says on your show, you got the drama that we were really looking for out of that last week. And what was ironic is that you and I had set up this interview prior to Sunday's race.
Yes.
And so one of the topics on this show was, between Justin and I, the fact that these 3 or 4 guys have dominated the sport but have been winning on average between 5 and 15 seconds ahead of second and third place, which, as you well know, and we've been talking to our listeners about, in auto racing, 5 seconds is an eternity. 13 seconds or 15 seconds is like a number of years. And so you're right. These 4 drivers, we have absolutely no issue with them dominating. We'd like to see the action that we saw on Sunday at Chicagoland happen a little bit more often. And so kind of parlaying that for what you and I had discussed prior to the great race that we saw in Chicagoland, And I would agree. I think a lot of the racing has been okay. It's just the outcomes. But we talk to a lot of fans that have pretty heavy concerns about the sport of NASCAR. And Justin and I, well, I mean, I'm going to be honest, we're decade-long fans of this sport